There's a secret that fine woodworkers have for making really tight joinery. It involves the use of a plane and a jig called a shooting board. You know, for most of my 50 years of woodworking, I didn't even know this existed. But since I found it, I've been able to improve the quality of my joinery. So today I'm going to show you how to make a shooting board, specifically how to make a shooting board for miter joints, and how you use it to get the best joinery you possibly can. To start off with, we need a base. Now, the key thing in this whole thing is making sure that everything is absolutely square. That this corner specifically is 90 degrees, and also that the corner we're going to make with the fence is 45 degrees, okay? So we want to be careful when we're cutting our wood. I've got 2 pieces of apple ply here, and I've chosen to use apple ply because I need a very stable, very flat surface. And this is of all the different engineered woods or sheet goods available to us, this is probably the one that's going to give us the flattest, truest surface, except for maybe MDF. Okay, you could make this out of MDF as well. It might not be as durable, but it would work just as well. So I'm using 1/2 inch MDF, and I've got 2 pieces. I've got one that's 14 by 14 and one that's 12 by 14. And I've already glued these together, making sure I kept my edges absolutely lined up. Now, the first one of these that I did, I didn't manage to keep them perfectly lined up. You know, when you glue things together, sometimes they shift a little bit. And it shifted on me. And so I ended up with a little bit off. Well, okay, what do you do if that happens? You take your crosscut sled on your table saw and you go ahead and shrew it back up. So I first cut this edge to give me a reference edge, and then use that against the fence to cut both this edge and this edge, okay? And this edge isn't as important. So that made sure that all my edges were square, my corners were square. Now, on this particular jig, the most important corner is this one right here. Okay, that's the one we want to make sure is absolutely square. And I have checked this board before I assembled it, and I checked it afterwards, and I am absolutely square. So these 2 are put together, and this becomes the base. Now the next piece is going to be the fence. As you just saw, I went ahead and cut a mitered end on one end of my fence using the miter sled on my table saw. This is another piece of apple ply. It's 2 inches wide. That's somewhat arbitrary, and I need to put it onto my base. Now, this is where the other place we've got to be really, really careful about our dimensions, okay, or specifically our angles, and that is the angle that we mount the fence. So I'm putting a speed square on here to line up with. I want to line up with this edge, and I want to be right on with my speed square, okay? So let me put some glue down. Yeah, I didn't put enough glue down. There we go. That should be a little better. We don't want a lot of excess squeeze out, but we do want some good adhesion. I'm actually staying a little bit away from my edge here in putting the glue down, spreading it out, because just so I don't have that squeeze out there. I could clean the squeeze out if I ended up with it, but it's just easier not to have it, okay? So now with my speed square in place to align this, I've got 2 things I want to make sure of. I want to make sure that I'm tight up against the speed square, and the speed square is tight up against the edge of my board, and the edge of my fence doesn't extend past the edge of my board. It's okay if it's a touch back, but I definitely don't want it to extend past. So I'm going to use some brad nails now, basically to tack it in place and hold it in place while that glue dries. I'm sure you noticed that my fence was too long, and I could have cut it to fit, and I probably would have gotten it close, but not exactly. So what I decided to do is go ahead and put it on too long, and then now that it's on, I'm going to go ahead and flush cut it to my base piece. There we go. Gets me a little more flush of a cut. So, and I've got one more cut to do like that. There's one more piece I need on here, and that's the bench hook. And what this will do is hook on the edge of my workbench to give me some leverage to push against. So I'm using the offcut piece from my fence for this. Turned out to be just about the right size. I had to trim it off a little bit, not much. And again, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple brads in this to hold it together while it dries rather than clamping it. I want to be careful that I don't end up with my fence sticking out, or my hook sticking out above the stage here. And I also want to make sure it doesn't stick out past the end down here, because that'll cause a problem for my plane. I'm better off having it a little shy and a little low than sticking up proud in either way direction. So here are two shooting boards, the miter one that I made with you watching and the crosscut one that I made beforehand. Now some people make a combination one where they'll have the fence adjustable, okay? I chose not to do that because I'm concerned about accuracy. The real accuracy in these, of course, is the angle between the fence and this side here, and that's true in both of them, okay? That angle is going to determine how accurately this works. And the whole idea here is accuracy. We're trying to make up for any inaccuracies in our saws cutting our pieces. So one last thing to do here, and this isn't an absolute requirement, but I'm going to go ahead and wax this surface because this is where my plane's going to ride, and there's no sense having any extra friction. I'm going to also wax this surface. Okay? Now I'm just using a block of beeswax for this. You can use any wax you've got. An old candle will work. So now this is ready to use. I told you at the beginning that this is all about tight, accurate joinery, okay? And that's why I'm concentrating on a miter shooting board. Now, I've got two pieces of 1x4 here that I've gone ahead and miter cut on my table saw using my miter sled. And I'll have to say my table saw does a really clean job of cutting, and my miter sled is really accurate. Nevertheless, I do have a little bit of a problem here. It's not absolutely perfect. I can see some saw blade marks here that what's happening is that when I put it together, they're leaving a little bit of a gap. That's what we're after eliminating, okay? Just about any saw is going to give you those types of gaps from time to time. Or the other thing you might get is a little waviness in your cut because of waviness in the saw blade, all right? These types of things can happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean that up with our plane. Now, I'm using a number 5 jack plane for this, a Stanley jack plane. You can actually use pretty much any plane. There are special planes made for this. They're called shooting board planes, and they range from $360 to $600. Yeah, they're kind of expensive. So the reason I'm using a number 5 instead of a smaller one is I want the weight. The weight is beneficial to us because it gives us more momentum. So the sides of the plane are perpendicular to the shoe, which is ideal because we're going to actually ride on that side, setting it up against our shooting board against this lip. And that's exactly what this is for. A large part of the reason we've got this step is so that we're not trying to get the edge of the plane. We're getting in the middle, more in the middle of the blade. So I'll set this on the ledge there. I'm going to run my piece of wood that's already been cut on the saw up against the front part of the sole of my plane, and I'm just going to make some very, very fine cuts here. The amount of the shavings I'm taking off of this are so small that they're hard to see. At least on the camera, they're hard to see. And all I'm doing is I'm evening up the little bit of irregularity that exists in my cut, okay? Yeah, I still got a little more to do. Okay, now by having done that, I've eliminated the ridge from the saw blade mark that I talked about. Now, I can do the exact same thing on this piece, but this piece actually came out better. And when I put the two together, I find that the gap that I had before is now gone. So this is a great way to clean up your miters and make sure you've got really, really good miter joints. It also works anywhere where you've got a butt joint, okay? I did the miter joint because that's more of an issue for most people. But this is the way that the fine woodworkers, the real experts, get such good joinery in their woodworking. And it'll work for you too.